Hi, my name is Daniel. This is my co-host Omar. Welcome to our show where we explore the fight and fighters. We're not talking about what just happens in the ring or in the cage, but the psychological, the emotional, and the spiritual fights that we all encounter in our lives. Historically, we have profiled fighters, the heart in their fight. We also have done breakdowns of their fights. But this time, we're doing something different. We're going to be talking about the fight game.
Today, we'll be talking to Matthew Dodge, founder and CEO of Dodge Sports and manager of some of the most exciting professional MMA stars like Andrew Yule and Anthony Romero. Welcome to Hard Enough Fight, Matt. Thank you for making time to be here, sir. How you doing today?
I'm good. Appreciate it, guys. How you doing?
Great. Well, thank you for joining our show. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself? How'd you get into this game?
Yeah, my journey starts at a young age. I knew I always wanted to be in kind of the sports industry in a sense. But I grew up, instead of playing Madden and FIFA and 2K, I grew up playing those GM video games for the most part. I just looked at sports a little differently. I wanted to pull the curtain back and kind of see, what was going on back there. I cared more about that. I cared about, manufacturing wins and the Moneyball mentality or the GM mentality. So when I was 18, I reached out to as many sports agencies as I could, just like a lot of people who might be listening to this podcast and want to get in the game, just to get an opportunity, a foot in the door, willing to work for free, willing to even pay my way. For the 99 doors that closed in my face, one opened for me. And back then that was an NFL agency that didn't have any clients whatsoever. I took that agency, got him a couple NFL clients first year, 7th round draft pick. And as that was happening, the UFC and MMA was starting to kind of take hold. That was when the Fox deal started, if you remember that, right? It was a big deal for the UFC to be able to get on a nationally televised, in front of a nationally televised audience, and slowly transitioned the game into the MMA side of things, which I loved. I absolutely loved. I was a fan first and foremost. And at that time, there was really not many people in the game. And I got to work with people like Johnny Hendricks and Joe Lozon as some of the first clients, and really built my way up the agency game. And then as of a couple of years back, started my own practice, felt I had what it took. And now Dodge Sports is a thriving MMA management business with, as you guys mentioned, about 15 to 20 of the top MMA clients in the world.
Can you tell us a little bit about your business, right? So what is your sports agency and your sports management company all about?
Yeah. It's like any other, it's so different than any other sport where you play a bunch of games. I mean, you're playing four games a year, really, in the MMA space. So what are you doing with your time in between? And that's really what a sports agency or a management group like Dodge Sports takes pride in. We go off the saying of building brand name athletes, because we want to spend the time to really develop brands so that they can transcend their fighting careers. So in a nutshell, I mean, it's securing those fights, finding great corporate partners that represent the fighters well, and the fighters can represent those brands really well. And then just handling a lot of other miscellaneous logistical things. We always say life gets in the way sometimes, and the agency really can help with a lot of those things, whether that be, relocating to a new state for a gym, or an opportunity that's, in a different country, just to be able to put the pieces together and make the training and the career a little easier.
I wanted to go back. You talked about your career starting in the NFL, and then once that the UFC partnered with Fox, there was some excitement there. There was a transition that happened. What is it about MMA that is so exciting? In particular, what is it about MMA fighters that's so exciting as a manager to work with?
I think that mixed martial arts is the greatest sport on the planet because it is truly an art form, right? A lot of other sports you can get away with physical talent, right? If you're 7 foot tall, you're going to be a good basketball player. You'll probably make it to the NBA, right? With MMA, it's way more than the physical game, right? If you're not there mentally, you're going to lose that fight, and if you lose that fight, you're in a tough spot, right? What I think I love most about mixed martial arts, though, is that every day and every fight matters, right? Think about all of the other sports, even football, right? When you only play 17 or 16 games a year, every game doesn't necessarily matter, right? You can lose a couple games and still make the playoffs and still have a great career. Also, you've got a team that can back you up if you're not, you're not feeling great that day. Well, in the MMA game, if you're not feeling great, you better step it up and figure out a way to win. It's not many sports that are like that. It's so pure. It's so beautiful. It's poetic violence at its finest. And one thing we talked about, not sure if it was on air or not, but these fighters, they're a different breed. I mean, they are the true epitome of an athlete. To fight 4 times a year is generally what you're going to do, but it is a career and a life choice, because when you're not fighting professionally or as an amateur, you're doing all of the necessary things to be prepared for those fights, right? The two or three sessions a day, the eating right to make sure your weight's low. What other sport has that? And that's what's so beautiful about the game.
I'm wondering, you talked about sort of I think that the vulnerability, the delicacy of that fighters have to sort of navigate in a career of MMA, right? The losses and the wins. As a manager, how do you support your clients to deal with both losses and wins, right? Knowing that every win or every fight matters, it can change the trajectory of their career. As a manager, how do you support your clients with both losses and wins?
It's a great question, because a lot of everything's in the MMA game, everything's tied to wins, right? Better opportunities, half your pay, right? Win and show money. You don't get that in any other sport. For us, what we do as a management group is we take a little bit different of approach to it. We are very much considered students of the game. We watch a ridiculous amount of tape as it relates to matchups and opponents. So I think, to take a step back from that question, we will only present opportunities that we feel we have the best opportunity of being successful and winning, right? We always say we're matchup driven, not money driven, because the money in the MMA game and the success associated with that will come if you choose the right matchups and have good career development. We're in this for the long haul. We're not in this to get into the UFC. The UFC is not the end goal for these guys. And if it is, that's the wrong mentality. The mentality should be, let me be successful in the UFC, and then let me do something great with that, those accolades and maybe that money afterwards. So for us, we try to protect our fighters even before the fight is in front of them by selecting matchups that we feel on paper and in tape we feel good about. But the truth of the matter is, sometimes shit happens, right? And you get caught or you lose, and we need to be there to support them in the best way possible. And maybe that is analyzing the coaching staff. Maybe they need a change of pace there. Maybe it's immediately getting back in there because, from a mental standpoint, time off only hurts, right? But I'll say this, every fighter is different. So every fighter handles the wins and the losses a little differently. So there is no cookie cutter response to your question. But we do try to minimize the issues associated with losing as much as we can before the fight even happens.
Which is great, right? Because what it shows is that your agency is being proactive and helping them, getting them to the best place possible to ensure that there is some success. There is there's a game plan for them moving forward. But I also know that a lot of fighters have a really difficult time managing their money. Right? And so how does your agency help folks with their money, even any kind of financial advice, financial literacy? What do you all do?
Yeah, so we're full service. Unlike a lot of other sports, the agent themselves can assist from a financial standpoint. For instance, take the NFL or Major League Baseball. There's a separation of church and state. The agent cannot touch the fighter's money, or the player's money in that sense, because there's collective bargaining agreements, and there's what they would consider players associations, unions, those types of things. That doesn't exist in the MMA space. So our agency partners with a couple really phenomenal money managers, people that will have conversations with those individuals, talk about their risk tolerance, and then put them in situations to be successful, allocate money for, business ventures that they want to take part in, set aside money so that they can start earning interest on some of that. So for us, it's, we've developed those relationships over the years, and actually a lot of the relationships that I have today came from the NFL side of things when I was working in that standpoint. Money's money and investing is investing. It doesn't matter if it's, fighting money or NFL money, it's the same thing. So yeah, we put those people kind of together at the table, and we let the specialists do their job. We're great at negotiating, great at finding marketing opportunities. We'll let the business managers that we work with handle that side of things. And then, we always will be a part of that discussion if the fighter, would like a second set of eyes or an opinion on things.
I'm wondering if you could speak, Matt, a little bit to the culture that you sort of are creating at Dodge Sports, right? Like what is the culture like? Like, is it just you? Are you the one, pulling the strings and making all the phone calls and bringing people to the table, or is there a team? What's the culture like? What's the vibe like? What can people expect, right? When they're working with you, what's exciting about Dodge Sports besides all the amazing things you've already mentioned, of course?
Thank you. So yeah, it used to be just me, but as we've grown and found some success, especially over the last 12 months, we've had the luxury of bringing a couple people on. So Joey Torres is another agent associated with Dodge Sports, partner of mine. He's doing phenomenal things. We were talking about Nick Maximov before the show started, Fighting Contender Series this Tuesday. Joey is the manager associated with Nick. So, he's able to help him from a day-to-day standpoint. You also get, as we mentioned, access to money managers and market managers. We also have in-house counsel. So all of the contracts that get sent to us from various levels, whether it be the lowest level regionally, all the way up to the UFC or Bellator, all of those contracts have to go through legal first to make sure that those guys and gals are protected from a legality standpoint. I've seen too many instances where fighters have just signed their name at the bottom line, on the bottom line, just because they want a fight opportunity. And the truth is they're signing, the next 3 years of their career away. How many times have we seen just today, some people blocking guys' opportunities in the UFC, right? With contracts and whatnot. And that's horrible. We never want to have our fighters in a situation like that. And that's why we put these safeguards and these people behind the scenes in place to minimize those risks. But from a culture standpoint, Omar, we are super family oriented. You look at any of our guys or girls who we represent and some of the things that they post, it's usually the Dodge family, Just so happens a couple of our Canadian clients actually all live in the same house now because we've developed that kind of ethos at Dodge Sports, where everybody wants to see people succeed. There's no egos. It's just about doing things the right way, trusting the process, and getting to work. Trusting the process is the biggest thing, though, I would say, as it relates to kind of our culture here, because as I mentioned earlier, we are not an agency that is going to fast track you to a big opportunity like the UFC or Bellator. We are going to bring you up in the right speed so that you have the best chance of being successful at the next level. That's our definition of success. And if you don't stand for that, then you're not a good fit for us. And we turn a lot of people down because of that.
We certainly cover a lot of fighters. We work with a lot of local and regional fighters, especially on one of the largest backyard MMA platforms there are in Streetbeefs, with almost 2 million subscribers on YouTube. And they have multiple channels, and a lot of their fights are reaching the millions, right? And the thousands. As soon as they post one, within seconds, you see 10,000, 30,000, 50,000, 100,000. And so we're seeing a lot of fighters coming to these backyard platforms like Streetbeefs. We're seeing a lot of viewership. So we're seeing that they're growing. A lot of these fighters are growing their platform, their brand. And so for them, like, how do they go from fighting in the backyard in Streetbeefs to now being represented by your agency or even making it to the pro level? Like, what is the step that they need to get there?
Well, first of all, how exciting, right? I mean, the fact that these guys and girls, I'm sure females are doing it too, are what an amazing differentiating factor that they have at the next level. Like, number one, they already have probably brand or name, exposure and loyalty in that sense, right? So you have a following. You probably have a pretty substantial social media following, especially if you're being successful in these fights or these competitions. So the fact that you're already 3 steps ahead is amazing, and actually very, very exciting for someone like me who, already has some of the branding situation down. Now we just need to refine some things and, push it out to even more people. But what I would say to them is take advantage of this platform that you're talking about and the viewership, clean some things up, and then get into some sanctioned amateur fights, which they're happening all over the place. Amateur fights, obviously, you're not getting paid for them, but they give you the ability to get additional experience on a little bit more of a sanctioned or professional setting, right? When you feel confident enough in your ability, that's when you turn the switch and begin to fight your professional career. But don't rush your professional career at all, because you only get one professional career unless you want to do a name change, and which people have done, believe it or not. There's ways to cheat the system, which is wild. But when you turn pro, you better be ready, because record matters, and a couple losses early in your career can really set you back. But what I like about, these street fighters and whatnot is the fact that they're kind of gaining some, amateur experience on their own. And I think this experience will actually suit them incredibly well. We mentioned it probably off air, but we've got a fighter on roster, Cole Farrell, 135 pounder, who's 10-0 right now as a professional fighter. He started his career in the backyards in Atlanta, Georgia, fighting. And that's who he is, and that's his ethos. And I think that has probably been such an important factor in getting him the notoriety that he has today, and also the success at a professional level because of all of that great experience. So I know that's a long-winded answer, Daniel, to your question in that sense, but I think what they need to do is continue to utilize the platform that they clearly have and the eyes that are on that, start to clean some things up, potentially move into a more structured amateur career, just so you can see the difference between fighting in a backyard versus fighting in a cage where you actually have judges and there's a referee and there are things that you can and cannot do, right? Get comfortable with that. And when you're comfortable with that, and there's a million amateur opportunities out there, by the way, people are always looking to fill amateur cards, then move yourself into professional. And after a few fights, that's usually where an agency or a management group would approach you, because you've checked a lot of the boxes that are necessary, and then they can really help assist moving your career further.
So it sounds like then it's the agency that reaches out to the fighter, not the fighter reaching out to the agency. Is that correct?
So it happens a few different ways. Anthony Romero, as you mentioned at the top of the hour, Omar, Anthony Romero reached out to us. And we got him some great opportunities after the fact. And Anthony is an absolute amazing, human being and professional athlete. So there are incredibly talented people out there that will reach out to the agency as a fighter. Oftentimes, though, if you have a good social media following, and again, you check a lot of those boxes, there will probably be a lot of agencies that will reach out to you, even in your amateur career. If you show flashes of brilliance, and have, some differentiating factor behind you, you're like a college athlete in a sense that's getting recruited by, big universities, or excuse me, a high school athlete getting, by big universities that want your services and talents and think that they can mold you for the next level. So it really just depends. I've seen both sides of things. Early on in your career, the fighter's probably going to be reaching out. A little later in the career, you'd probably want to reach out yourself as a fighter.
And so you also mentioned during, you said to clean things up. What does that really mean? So is it like cleaning things up in terms of your fighting game, or is it cleaning things up in your social media game? What exactly do you mean by that?
I think it's all of the above. When I say clean things up, you need to have a clear, concise message, right? Who are you? You can't just be a backyard fighter. There are, as you mentioned, 2 million of them, right? They're all backyard fighters by default. What are you beyond that, right? Are you a kung fu ace who wears a gi when they do it, right? And are you someone who wears a different colored skull cap all the time and it's part of your nickname? Are you somebody that looks a certain way, right? Like maybe you're a very big, bulky person and you go by Hulk, and you take that Hulk persona, and kind of clean things up and make it your own. That's what I mean when I say clean things up, because you have to take the extra steps in order to differentiate yourself beyond everybody else who does backyard fighting.
And how would you recommend them taking that extra step? And what platforms do you think would help them in that pursuit?
Sure. So you can't fake authenticity, but you have to kind of be true to yourself. I would talk to the people around you. So, to answer your question, actually, nicknames in the MMA space generally are not given by the fighter, right? They're earned. Nicknames are earned usually. And it's usually given to you by the people around you, right? Anthony Romero, for instance, is the genius. He's a genius because coaches said, wow, you pick up things so quickly. You're like a genius, right? So he earned that nickname. I don't think fighters should give themselves nicknames. I don't think it would work that way. I think talk to your community. It sounds like with all the Facebook groups and all the people, there's an active community that is talking about these types of fights all the time. What are the common themes, right? What are those common themes, and how can you take those things and kind of make them genuine and make them authentic, and then stand behind them and push forward with those. So I would say listen to the communities, get on the forums, the Facebook groups, those types of things. Use Instagram for polls, right? Say, hey, trying to start a new nickname, figuring, these are the ones that have been mentioned to me the most number of times. What does everybody think? I think they'll be surprised with the kind of results that you're going to get. Interestingly enough, Andre Ewell, as you mentioned at the top of the broadcast too, before we got into the UFC, we did that exact thing. We had 4 nicknames that we thought he was going to have, and we let the fans decide, because that's who Andre is. He's the people's champ. He does things for the fans, and the fans picked, Mr. Highlight, and it's a great nickname that sticks, and obviously all the commentators love to have it, and he has that persona and that personality to back it up.
So I actually want to bring up another fighter of yours, Jasmine, and I could not say her last name. I don't want to butcher it. How do you say Jasmine's last name? Jazz, I can't even say it.
Jazadavicius.
Would have not gotten that.
It's Lithuanian, so I'm sure you're not brushed up on your Lithuanian.
No, I am not. But shout out to Jasmine. So I was checking out some of your other interviews, and I bring her up in this sort of conversation around making this transition from amateurs to pros, because there's something special about Jasmine on your team, right? In that she's, if I'm not mistaken, probably one of the only people on your roster who you actually started managing from amateurs into the pro. And you talk about her having the it factor, that thing. Can you talk a little bit about, maybe elaborate on what is that if factor that managers such as yourself look for in amateur fighters that might actually inspire you to manage them from the amateur into the pros, right? Because I could imagine that a lot of the folks who are going to be watching this that are street beef fighters saying, you know what, I got that if factor. I'm ready right now. Like, put me in, coach. What are you looking for? What was it about Jasmine that you were like, she's the one, let's get it. Let's move on.
Yeah, it's a number of things. Just a couple of things from a criteria standpoint that we look for when we do evaluation. So you're right, Omar. Jasmine was the only amateur that we've ever signed. We signed her after 4 amateur fights. Knew she was ready for the professional rank. So a couple of things that stood out to me about Jasmine. First and foremost, her coaching staff, also her boyfriend, is the number 1 wrestling coach in the entire country of Canada. So the fact that you have a world-class talent in one area in mixed martial arts is a huge it factor for me. If when adversity strikes in a fight, which it will 100% of the time, when it strikes, you need to have a core competency that you are better than every single person at. And for Jasmine, it's her wrestling. She doesn't even need to use it in a lot of her professional fights because her striking is so crisp and good as well. So what I noticed about Jasmine in particular is through 4 amateur fights, significant improvement in all areas of her game after every single fight. If you watch somebody and film, and again, we are film nerds and geeks, I probably watch 5-6 hours of film every single day. On prospects or on potential opponents or on our own fighters, so we can check out weaknesses, strengths, weaknesses, and work around those things. If you don't see improvement after each fight, that's a problem. You need to continue to diversify your game in order to be successful at the next level. So for her and her it factor, I saw this ridiculous development, and that has continued into her professional career as well. Another criteria for her, and this is from a branding standpoint, she's a very marketable fighter. There aren't many women who have the mentality that Jasmine has. As you mentioned, Omar, put me in, coach, I'll fight anybody. That's Jasmine's mentality. Jasmine is not worried about her record. Jasmine is not worried about, getting in a phone booth and swinging, right? She's not worried about any of that. She just wants to fight, and she's a fighter true and true. And we love that about her because it's really easy to market something like that or someone like that. She's also comes very, very highly recommended by a couple of our clients, Anthony Romero being one of them. So, when we evaluate people and somebody on our team says, hey, you need to look at this person is really great. They see them, every day in the gym and the work that they put in. That means a lot to us, when somebody does that. And she got a couple stamps of approval by people who train with her on a regular basis. So it really checked a lot of boxes on our side. As you can tell, our evaluation process goes far beyond just watching tape or seeing a fight. It really has to pass a lot of levels of review there. But for the it factor, I want to see progression, and I want to see that world-class ability in one area in particular.
And you also mentioned gyms. Like, how important gyms are to a fighter's trajectory?
The most important thing. Yeah. Without a good gym and a good home base and a place that the fighter feels comfortable, there's nothing we can do, right? I mean, we can only go so far as a management group, right? We need to trust in the fact that the coaches are going to prepare them for every possible outcome, and we need to feel confident in that, just as coaches need to feel confident that we're going to get the right matchups for their fighters. We've been fortunate enough to work with a lot of great gyms in the US and in Canada where, we haven't had too many issues associated with that. But Daniel, I'll be honest, like for some gyms that we know, if we know a fighter comes out of a certain gym and we don't really respect that gym as much because we've heard things about their work ethic or whatever, we won't sign them. We won't take on the headache associated with that. So if you're a fighter and you're thinking about, hey, I want to be more attractive to management groups, or I want to be more attractive to promotions and organizers and matchmakers, I should think about the crowd that I ride with, and the team that backs me up, because that's a huge part of this entire thing.
That's a lot of good wisdom right there, right? Because it is, right? So gyms do matter. It seems like gyms matter. The way that you are talking about yourself, your promotion, the promotional materials is also a really good factor. Also, it seems like your experience as a fighter. Where are you fighting? Are you fighting in a regional scene? Are you fighting in other different venues? Also matters. And so it seems like fighters have to really think about their fight career in totality, right? So they have to look at every single avenue that will help them get to the next level. And is there any other thing that isn't necessarily visible or just as obvious as those factors that help a fighter get to the next level?
So fighters have to think of this as a business, even in the backyard, game. If they want to make this a career, right? If they're just doing this for fun and, they think it looks cool for their friends and girls or whatever, fine. You can handle it however you want. But if you want this to be your career, you need to operate and treat it as a business, right? So what that means is, be smart with your money. Where are you putting your money? Are you investing it back into your career? Invest it back into your business, right? Keep your word. That's the biggest thing. Keep your word. Even if it's like, it's a pain in the butt to do it, right? If you say you're going to be at a place at a certain time, or you say you're going to show up and you're going to show up on weight, keep your word and be professional, because this industry, as many of these fighters that you see out in backyards fighting, this industry in MMA itself is incredibly small. There are only a few organizations where you can make, a living fighting for, right? Bellator, UFC, PFL in the US, and then there's a couple internationally, right? There are only a few spots on those organizations all in all, right? If you are unprofessional, even from a regional standpoint, right? You're fighting, in here, in Miami, Florida for a regional promotion that's on UFC Fight Pass, right? And you show up, miss weigh-ins, or you show up 5 pounds overweight or something like that, right? You better know damn well that that's getting up to potentially all the way up to the UFC and the brass there. And they're going to remember that, because it's a game of inches. A lot of people are talented in this space. Some people know other people more than not, right? So it's a little political in that sense, but like, your reputation will always follow you. Just like in business, if you screw over the wrong people in an industry, like, you might never get an opportunity again. So one thing that I'll say for sure, and it's what we pride ourselves on, and it's part of our culture, as you mentioned, Omar, is really for those fighters to be honorable, keep their word, and be professional in every single thing that they do, because you never know who's watching.
I mean, this whole, I think, conversation, you're dropping gems, and I wanted to see if you can touch on another topic that I think is probably as important as the physical, the business aspect of it. Really, we're talking about the mental game, right? Like you actually mentioned this at the top of the show, right? Which is, how unique MMA is to every other sport, in that you have to be not only physically ready, but mentally ready every single time you show up. I'm wondering, what are some of the things that you've seen some of your fighters do mentally to prepare themselves for a fight, for training, for the business, to have a longevity in this game? Like, is it like therapy? What are coaching? Like, what is some of the things or the practices that you've seen in terms of getting mentally prepared for this game?
Sure. I think everybody's different, but you have to be mentally strong to be in this game. So what we've seen is a lot of times the coaches become mentors, and the coaches themselves can prepare you for what it's like to be in there. A lot of times they have prior fighting experience, which I think is probably incredibly vital to have. I'm not really sure if you could be a great coach if you haven't fought professionally yourself, because there would be a little bit of a disconnect there. So the majority of our coaches fought in the past and can do their best to get them mentally prepared. But what does Mike Tyson say? You think you got a game plan until you get punched in the face, right? And that's the truth. So it's oftentimes you might think you're mentally prepared, but then you get in there and you're not mentally prepared. So I would say that is a lot of times why you want to have an extensive amateur career, because you can learn, lose and learn. Whereas in a professional game, if you lose and learn, that's an expensive lesson, whereas an amateur, it's a good lesson. So from a mental game, the amateur career gets you pretty damn close to being ready, because you're still fighting. You got a couple shin pads on for the first ones, right? But after I think 4 or 5 amateur fights, you take those shin pads off and you're fighting, and you can get choked out or get knocked out. You're not fighting as long, but you're still fighting, and that gets you prepared as much as I think you possibly can be. The other thing you touched on, though, Omar, is therapy. So there are a couple companies out there today that we've worked with in the past for a few of our fighters. One in particular is a company called MindLock, and they work with a couple UFC fighters right now, a couple amateur fighters, regional fighters, and whatnot. And they they tailor make a designed program for you to get you mentally sharp and prepared for what is about to happen. And a lot of times that's journaling, writing down your thoughts, making sure that you share with people the things that are bothering you or giving you anxiety or angst, and just discussing them with people. Some people want that, some people don't like that. So I would say there's no one size fits all strategy for that. But I would say as a manager, that is what an amateur career is designed for. And if when you're in the professional career and you feel like you still want to capitalize on that and improve that, that's where some of these therapy groups could really help out.
Yeah, I certainly want to just touch on this very thing about managing expectations, right? I think everyone thinks, oh, I'm going to make it to the UFC in 1 year or 2 years, right? And so it's like, if a fighter does get a number of fights, like how long does it normally take for them to get to one of the top organizations like Bellator, UFC? And so how long does it normally take?
So Bellator is a little different because Bellator fills their undercards with like 1-0 guys, debuters, things like that, most of the time because it's local. But their main card slots are a lot like the UFC slots just in general. I think the earliest I've ever seen a guy get a big opportunity, like a call up to the UFC or Bellator, would be right around 4-0. So before you even get to that point, you're probably not on the radar unless you have significant experience in another martial art, right? Maybe you're a, Jordan Burroughs style wrestler and you have, Olympic accolades, right? Or you had a kickboxing career like Israel Adesanya had, where you were in Glory and you were, 20-2, right? You might actually get an opportunity earlier in your career. For instance, one guy that Israel Adesanya trains with just fought last week on Contender Series, or 2 weeks ago on Contender Series. Yeah, 2-0 kid, and now he's 3-0, and he's got the UFC contract because he had that back. So I'm gonna operate under the assumption that these individuals do not have that high level of experience in the back. So to manage expectations, you're probably 3-4 professional wins, right, away from being on a radar for a big opportunity. So really that's the expectation. But the truth of the matter is that can be sped up or slowed down and on your fighting style. Are you getting finishes? Are you going to decisions, right? I think everybody who watches UFC or Contender Series knows it's about finishes. It's about being an exciting fighter. So there is no rhyme or reason to who gets called up necessarily. I wish there were a little bit more, black and white criteria associated with that. But from a managing expectations fight standpoint, before you're even on that radar and the brass even knows about you, you're probably looking at least 4-0 as a professional. They don't need managers right away. You know what I mean? Like they don't need to rush to get to a management group, because I personally can't get you anything that you can't get yourself for the first few fights of your career. Like you're going to be fighting locally, you're going to be fighting regionally, you're going to be fighting guys that are similar in your standpoint, like debuters versus 1-0 versus 1-1s. Like, it isn't, I'm not going to say that it's not worth our time to do those things. It's just fighters can get that themselves locally, regionally, in their area. Soon as they get to that, as we mentioned, Daniel, that 4-0 level or something like that, that is where you might want to say, I'm going to shoot my shot now. And I want to go with an agency that is going to get me a huge opportunity on, hey, LFA, UFC Fight Pass. Maybe I want to be the first fight on the main card at 4-0, and they're going to put me up against a 5-0 guy. But I'm ready to take my shot. I'm ready to put myself in the spotlight, in the national spotlight. That's where an agency can really help. Like, to give away any percentage of your fight purse before then really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It really doesn't. And the only time that an agency, again, will represent somebody earlier in the process is if they see something special in them, like we saw in Jasmine. Like, because as soon as she goes pro, she's going to get 1 million people reaching out to her as soon as they see a professional fight. And, now we're competing against, everybody and their brother. So, that's, I think, one of the bigger takeaways. Sometimes people think they need a manager to even get started. You don't need a manager to get started.
Awesome. Well, we certainly, I think we're at the close of our show, so we certainly appreciate your time with us. So how can people learn about your company? Where should they go if they want to reach out to you for just more information, more wisdom? Where can they contact you?
Mostly Instagram would be the best platform for anybody to reach out. It's Dodge_sports. Feel free, anybody who's listening to this and just wants maybe some advice, some guidance, or has a question that they want answered, me and my team are more than happy to address those types of things. Just mention, this podcast, and we'll be sure to get those things addressed.
Omar, do you have anything else?
No, I'm just super grateful for your time, for your wisdom, the knowledge, your passion. I think this is going to be incredibly enlightening for a lot of folks who are looking to make that next step into their professional mixed martial arts career. Thank you so much, Matt. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining in. Hopefully you were able to gain some wisdom from this interview that you can apply to your life. You can certainly support us by going to our merchandise and getting some Shinigami gear that we have there. You can also subscribe to our channel. And we also have a Patreon page if you'd like to donate to the things that we've been doing so that we can continue to grow this platform. And till then, till the next time we see each other, dig deep and double down your own commitments to your life.